Please stand as you are able for the reading of the Holy Gospel, Luke chapter 17, verses 11 through 17. Then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not to lose heart. He said, "In a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. In that city there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, 'Grant me justice against my opponent.' For a while he refused, but later he said to himself, 'Though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice so that she may not wear me out by continually coming.' And the Lord said, 'Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. And yet, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?'" The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Will you pray with me? God of us all, please hold my hand right now and keep me from shaking. Help everyone to lean in and help in looking for a message today that we hear from God and this parable of Jesus to help us persist. Be with us all as we think together now. Amen. Good morning. I'm Ann Langston, and I probably should not be here, but I am the lay leader at St. John's, and it becomes Lay Sunday, and this will be my second trip up here, and then we're going to be finding a new lay leader, or we're going to be finding somebody else, so I don't shake quite so much, because I never do that, but I'm doing it this morning. So just pray with me a little bit today that I can at least begin to get us thinking about a couple of things that I think are very important in what we're doing here at St. John's. The title of my talk today didn't quite make the bulletin. As usual, I was busy doing other things. But my title today is, Why Persist? It's a question for all of us. I think it's a question that comes up in this parable that has been put before us. I will answer that question one way, and we'll see if you follow me through the day with it. I say why we persist is because nobody likes a quitter. Do you like a quitter? Do you want to be a quitter? No. Well, let's figure out how we can persist then and not be a quitter. First, let's look at the context of this gospel story. There are two characters, but there's also a third, which is Luke is writing about what Jesus was trying to say. And he says that he wanted us to continue to pray and not grow weary. And he uses these two characters, the judge and the widow. So I did a little research about judges in this time when Jesus was telling this parable. Judges were not who we think of them being today. They are not either elected and trained and the like. They came in two ways. A Jewish judge was not one person. And this, therefore, is not the story of a Jewish judge. The elders of the church or the synagogue were the judges in this time. And there were always three. So basically, the Jewish community was way ahead of its time in the way in which they arbitrated disputes with three people being involved. That's not what we're dealing with today with this widow. We're dealing with a judge who was either appointed by Herod or by the Romans. That created a problem. A little bit of probably not so clean politics were going on in those days. And the judges were known by many sort of slang callings as being just kind of lazy folks. They didn't make decisions, and they were very open to bribe. To get a ruling out of a judge or a decision generally required a bribe, whether it was feeding them, giving them money, or whatever. So that's the first person we're dealing with here. The second is a widow. This is hard because I don't think of widows today in the same way. But in Jesus' time, a widow was somebody who had no standing in the community, no resources, and was basically on the bottom of the totem pole as far as society was concerned. She was poor, she was defenseless, she had no one to advocate for her. But she had one weapon and one thing in her quiver. She was persistent. And why was she persistent? Because she was trying to take care of what she loved and what she cared about. So even though she had no standing, she continued to just annoy the heck out of this judge until he finally gave up and did something for her. Well, we always think of people that are persistent, or I think most of us do, as somebody that's kind of annoying, that bothers us, that keeps picking at us a little bit. I'm sure my husband could talk about my persistence. We won't ask him for stories, but right now I'd say most of it has to do with things that fall apart in a 98-year-old house, and why can't they all get fixed next week, Dudley? I don't know. But I probably am very persistent in asking those questions on a daily basis. I don't mean to be annoying, but that's really not what I'm talking about today. Not that kind of persistence. I prefer the definition of persistence as a firm or obstinate continuance in the course of action in spite of difficulty or opposition. Basically, persistence to overcome that which needs to change. Basically, not to be a quitter. A few years ago, the 25th anniversary of Church Help, we invited Andrew Young to come to Memphis to speak to a group of donors and volunteers and staff that were gathered. And he sat on a stage and basically told stories about his life. Well, I guess I was expecting all of the really hard things that he did with Martin Luther King and how he persisted in being able to be a real leader and tackle the tough things. But he told a story about himself and Martin Luther King that surprised me a little bit. And it had to do with trying to make the decision about going to Alabama to lead a nonviolent revolution and begin to take up the cross with the people in Alabama and those who were being downtrodden. And Andrew Young told the story that he and Martin Luther King argued and discussed and worried and prayed and basically had come to the conclusion they weren't going to do this. They were going to hang up their cross, so to speak, and they were going to stay in the Northeast. They were going to stay away from the troubles that were going on in Alabama. But something interfered. We never know how God's going to speak to us or come to us. But Andrew Young said something changed their minds. Their persistent wives. So see, sometimes it's not bad. Young said that their wives said unequivocally, you cannot be quitters. You cannot stop. You have the ability to carry forth in this work that needs to be done, and you can go forth and do it in a way that is living out your faith and making it become a part of the fabric of this country. So I think about that story because what if they had stayed silent? What if they had lost their voice? What if they had been in the role of the widow in this parable and basically said, these guys are in charge, they make the decisions, they're the clergy, we're going to let this go. But they didn't. They persisted because they saw that there was a reason not to be a quitter. I think St. John's is a history of a persistent congregation. Johnny made reference, and we do most every time any of us talk, to what went on here back in those days of civil rights strife, when churches across this city, across this country, were barricading their doors to people of color, where people were saying, "You're not as good as me, woe is you." We're still doing that. But St. John's has persisted in saying, we will not quit, so that when Jesus comes through that door and he's looking for faith on earth, he's going to look around this place and say, they did persist, they didn't quit. And I think that's important. But I think there's something else that's also true about persistence and our ability to build faith. And it has to do with our relationships with each person in this room, with one another and the community that we have built here at St. John's over these many years. We've evolved, we've changed, we've opened our doors wider and wider. But have we looked to take care of the people on the pews next to us? Have we thought about what's hurting in their hearts? Have we thought about the fact that maybe they need a hug today? I look at Johnny because we all like Johnny hugs. I think some days that we get so wrapped up in the business of church that we forget about what we're here to do, which is to support one another, not just to open our doors to the people outside. Because by building on these relationships that we have together, by listening to our family as Young and King did, and by working together to grow in our faith, we will become a congregation that does open our doors even wider because we love one another. This has been a hard year in this church. We have lost leaders. We have lost clergy. We have battled with the greater church and what's going on at the national level or the international level of the Methodist Church. But the thing we cannot do is have conflict with one another. We must talk to each other. We must reason with one another. We must struggle with one another over the tough questions that we're dealing with in this world and within this church. And we must be persistent in being a community of love. And I think that's what I don't ever want to see us quit doing. I want us to work together, to reach out, to rise up, to bring others in. But we want those people to be with us because we're not quitters with one another. I think one of the most amazing things that happens in my email box almost every day right now is an email from Mimi about our care team. I'm amazed at how many needs we have in this congregation to care for one another. It's not always about somebody being in the hospital or somebody having a death in the family, although we do, I think, do a lot of loving and caring in those circumstances. It's also about celebrating our anniversaries, our birthdays, our births of new children, which populate our nursery. It's about, the ordination of new members of our clergy teams. It's about the things that we as a congregation need to love and care for each other with. If you're not on that care team, just sign up for the emails and you'll find out what you could be doing to be taking care of other people here. So where am I going, and why does this have anything to do with persistence? Well, I think it's because we need to be thinking about how we grow in our own faith. That's the question or the purpose in what Jesus led to in this parable. When the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? If we persist in trying to understand what it is that God has called us to do on this corner, if we persist in trying to love one another and get to be better friends and caretakers of one another, we will be able to walk Jesus through that door and show him that we have had faith in what God taught us about reaching out and loving each and every person in the world. We will grow in our faith to understand that it's not about becoming insulated. It's not about being right. It's not about others being wrong. It's all about love and having faith that that is where this journey is taking us. There is a book that I think we used it in Sunday school, and many years ago I had it on my bookshelf for a long time, by Alan Jones, called Reimagining Christianity. Does anybody remember studying this book? Did you lead that talk? You brought it to us, okay. I couldn't figure out why. I've had it for a long time, and I often look at this because as we've gone through the struggles in the church, we talk about how do we reimagine religion, how do we reimagine church. And I like to think that St. John's has done that, and that we've done it because we've studied and we've searched for how deep our faith can be. But I'm going to read just a little bit from this because I think it says what we're trying to do and why we won't quit. A monk who greatly influenced me used to say, "The opposite of faith is not doubt, it's certainty. Keeping the big questions alive is as important as answering them. In fact, deepening the questions is the task of mature religion. A religion of all answers keeps people in an infantile state. Once you have all the answers, you have nothing to learn. But for the growing number to whom such an approach is irresponsible and unacceptable, there's another way. There always has been. It's both right in front of us and hard to find. Hard because we naturally resist questions that lead us to the unknown and compel us to change. Some take the path of least resistance and find their answers in a reassuring tribalism. Think of church, tribal, closed, which has both religious and political expression. So strong is the need to belong in times of crisis and insecurity, people band together for mutual support, but they do it in ways that can be destructive. Religion easily degenerates into a mechanism for excluding the stranger or nonconformist from the tribe. It's then that religion deserves to be criticized. Sadly, we see much of the worst of religion in the world today. Religion, as all the answers, seems to have the upper hand. That's where we find the imperative to reinvent and reimagine the life of faith. But when we see the best of religion as a quest for meaning and community, which includes everyone, we find life and energy that heal rather than wound, love rather than hate, embrace difference rather than violently seeking to eradicate it. My prayer for St. John's is that we not be quitters and that we persist in learning and growing in our faith so that we can reinvent, we can think about how we are a place in which healing occurs, where all are welcome, and most of all, where we love and care for one another, so that when Jesus comes, he will find faith on earth, and hopefully we will rise up and reach out from St. John's to share that across our city with those who need a place where they can learn and grow in their faith. So, in closing, don't be a quitter. Reach out, hug someone in the congregation today, learn what's different about them and how you might grow in your faith by understanding them, and then make sure that when you ask the question, why persist? The answer is, because at St. John's, we always do. Amen.